name is Jessica Sundstrom, and what I was about to say is that we are recording tonight's meeting, so just please keep that in mind. Thank you so very much for joining us for tonight's talk between KIA Chief Curator Rahima Barber and the artist Yun-Fei Ji. The exhibition Yun-Fei Ji, Tall Tales of a Scavenger, just opened at the KIA last weekend. So if you are in the Kalamazoo area, please come and see it. We are now open on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And we're very excited that we can introduce the work of this incredible artist to you and to our community. And I will not talk for much longer, but what I would like to ask is please remain on mute for the duration of this program. And any questions, please type into the chat and we will read them out loud at the end of this meeting for the Q&A portion. And without further ado, I would love to introduce KIA Chief Curator Rahima Barber and artist Yun-Fei Ji.
Hello, thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate that. I am so excited and just delighted that we have gotten such an incredible artist that I was able to work with over this last, goodness, it's been almost a year and a half, Yun-Fei. But I think it's just an incredible show. We worked very collaboratively on it. So I hope you get a chance to see it. It's just excellent. And I want to tell you just a little bit about who I'm going to be speaking with this evening. Yun-Fei Ji was raised in China during the Cultural Revolution. Ji studied and earned his BFA from the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. And then after relocating to the United States in 1986 on a fellowship from Fulbright College at the University of Arkansas, where he received his MFA, Ji found his voice as an artist who reinvents the system of symbolic structures and folklore found in classical Chinese painting. Ji's work has been widely exhibited throughout the United States and Europe, including the Prospect 3 New Orleans Biennial in 2014, the 2012 Biennale of Sydney, the 2011 Lyon Biennale, and the 2002 Whitney Biennial. Ji received the 2006 American Academy Prix de Rome Fellowship and Residency and was a 2005 Artist in Residence at Yale University. And I have so many other exhibitions and places that our esteemed guest this evening has exhibited at prior to exhibiting here with us at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. And I have to let everyone know that this is just, I'm so excited because the Cleveland Museum of Art, the University of Contemporary Art at UMass Amherst, the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, the Rose Museum at Brandeis University, the University of Pennsylvania, the Institute of Contemporary Art, the Ullin Center for Contemporary Art in Beijing, the Ruth and Elmer Wellen Museum of Art in Hamilton College, and the Honolulu Museum of Art. He's also been the subject of several monographs, including Yun-Fei Ji, The Intimate Universe, and Yun-Fei Ji Waterwork. And among the many notable private and public collections he's included in are the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum, the Baltimore Museum of Art, Brooklyn Museum of Art, Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, Philadelphia Museum of Fine Arts, the Cleveland Museum of Fine Arts, and the Yale University Art Gallery. He currently lives and works between New York and Pennsylvania and is represented by James Cohan Gallery. And I just have to say, we have a VIP in our midst. I hope you all got that from all those different places that I've read. And, but honestly, Yun-Fei has been such a pleasure to work with, such an amazing artist and just a general just good human being. So I am proud to present him and speak with him this evening. Welcome, Yun-Fei.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome. I mean, I can't say enough good things about you. It's just been so delightful to get to know you. And I think that we have developed quite a rapport, especially because we've been talking for so long. Like the first time, I have to tell our audience, the first time that Yun-Fei and I had a conversation, it was like right in the middle, like the pandemic had just happened. Like we were all like fresh and new. And we were like, okay, what is happening? And we just really had some very really in-depth talks, long conversations about the world and the work. And I just have gotten to know him so well. And so we have some images that we have to show this evening that I think would be a good place to start, right? And I will just start with asking you a little bit about just the beginning and talking about your studies at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing and the Fulbright College at the University of Arkansas, and just asking about those sort of differences and how your painting practice merges those two foundations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. First, let me just say thank you so much for inviting me to be, to be able to show my work with the audience, to share my work with the audience in Michigan. And, and this, yeah, like you said, it was so helpful to talk to you during this whole last year, to go through, to try to understand what's going on. And, with all these very complex issues, happening in America, in the world, there was so much for us to talk about. It was very helpful. So thank you also for that. And yeah, so I grew up, like you said, during the late Cultural Revolution in China. As I went to the art school there, and that was sort of the beginning of sort of liberalization of culture in China, art in general. So there was a lot of excitement. The first year, we were the first year student after the Cultural Revolution, very chaotic, destructive time. And, that was the first year, like the student, most colleges were all closed during that time. Mm-hmm. And so I was very fortunate enough to be able to go to a college, even at that time. And so Deng Xiaoping was taking over the power. There was a general sense of finally we put behind like Mao's era behind us, like we can like doing some work, making art. And most of my teachers, quite a few of my teachers were during the Cultural Revolution, or even before that. There was a really repressive period even before the Cultural Revolution, that they were inviting, I think the government was inviting intellectuals to criticize, to improve, and the people believed it. And when people did, and they were actually being prosecuted and being sent away to kind of in the remote countryside to reform. So when I went to school, a lot of my teachers came back to the academy to start teaching. And so there was a general sort of restoring all this time they have lost. And these people were maybe 20 years, was not able to do what they wanted to do.
Wow.
And so, yeah, by the time they came back, it was already they're in their 50s or something. So I think that was a very important lesson for when we already know, like, the sort of through understanding what they went through, I think my generation in general have learned a very dark lesson. So in terms of the possibility, like how basically a generation of artists are being kind of silenced and being not able to do what they want to do. So
so how does that tie in? I mean, when I look at your work, certainly I see it. I see that idea definitely communicated. But then when you came to the US, and like, how was that different? And how do we see that now in your work too?
So I think their experience have a lot to do with my decision to come to the U.S. actually. Yeah, because I don't want it to, because before I came out, the political situation were becoming like a more restrictive again. They have this sort of pulling back. During I was in school, it was more liberation, more kind of throwing of all these restrictions. But then maybe 4 or 5 years, I think maybe 6, 7 years later, things have starting to, you can see the parameter where the intolerance maybe of, or the things that's not allowed is being more pronounced. Maybe I think within the government there were people talking about this went too far, and of course when after a few years I came to the States, that's when Tiananmen happened, 1989, and I think this was like a huge struggle within the government in terms of political, like a reform or not, right? So the student was very much want to have a democracy more like opening up, and there were forces within the government wants to maybe allow more economic reform, but less, not so much of a political reform. So they were, I think, genuinely kind of freaking out about what's happening in Eastern Europe, and in, the Berlin Wall kind of came down at that time, and Soviet Union was disintegrating, and I think it's genuine, maybe fear, right? It's I think so that was kind of my generation. There were this sort of yearning for more opening up, and then it was, maybe not possible at that time.
Right. Okay, so we have images that we want to show our guests this evening, and I think we should start with the Village Wen, right? I mean, because we have several images from that you have made that sort of concern the Village Wen, and I think this idea that sort of permeates through your work about displacement and tradition, right? Or the traditions that may be lost, and how that plays out in your work is somewhere that I think we should start, certainly, especially because I was thinking today, someone asked me about the paper that you use, the type of paper, and certainly this is a type of paper that is used in classical Chinese landscape painting. So let's show that image of the Village Wen, and then we can kind of talk about thank you. Talk about this. This one is Drought in Village Wen, and it has a narrative attached to it. And I think that one of the things we've been talking about is how some of these works not all of these works really have this sort of narrative element as far as having the characters included, right? But here you're giving voice to something, giving voice to maybe a people that that have been voiceless, that have been deliberately silenced, right? So can we talk about the Drought in Village Wen? And I know we have an audio clip. Do you want to talk about that first, or
would you like to play the?
Sure.
Because I think you did really a good job there.
Okay, we'll go and do that. Click that.
Yun-Fei, Drought in Village Wen, created in 2013, watercolor and Xian paper and silk. According to the elders in Village Wen, many villagers starved to death during the Great Leap Forward. People could hear the ghost cries along the roads around the village even during the daytime. Villagers were afraid of leaving their homes. Then someone said that anyone would be scared of the village secretary, including the ghost, if you said his name loudly enough. This solution proved effective. Some people in Village Wen were not willing to immigrate to cities for work. They farmed fish and worked in the fields. There was a big drought in Yarajan. Upstream, there was not enough water for the farming of fish, so the villagers had to pull the fish cages tens of miles downstream. In June, it began raining nonstop, and the river's water level soared. The fish, which the villagers had been cultivating for 3 years, all suddenly died. Yun-Fei, 2013.
Thank you. So that's my voice, I guess. And so I appreciated having the text, right? And having this element. And I really appreciated you even encouraging me to be the voice. But I connected so deeply with some of these works that had the narrative, as hopefully I think people can tell by my maybe dramatic reading. But can you tell us a little bit about the Village When, how this got started, and why it continued to be a subject that you explored?
First of all, when I was a kid, I was kind of brought up by my grandmother in a village in the south, and there was a lot of things happened there, and before I was 10, so it was a kind of me as a kid exploring a village, and then I spent I think that since 2011, I was back in China for 6 years. After spending 25 years something in the United States, and I sort of, because my father was health, I was back there for a while, and there were just all these villages keep disappearing, and because there were not enough people, able-bodied people left to work in the city, and there were only, so literally a lot of these villages were maybe 3 villages all of a sudden become 1 village. All these other villages disappeared. In fact, the village that I grew up in disappeared. So I also I did a very big project of Three Gorges Dam relating to this, hydroelectric project in China, largest in the world. And also the sort of effect of displacement of the people, 1.5 million people being displaced and scattered all over China. And I'm actually for the sort of hydro dam idea, but it's not these mega projects. They were very destructive environmentally and forever changing. And it was a huge debate during that time about whether to build or not to build this huge dam, because now after all these years, you can even the idea of preventing like flood, it was still a big question, because a lot of there was still a lot of flood afterwards. So I went, I sort of, I went personally a few times to this area to collect information and to kind of see for myself. And then later, just around 2011, around that time, there was also another huge project to getting the Yangtze River, the south. They're building this canal to Beijing to the north, a 1,000-mile canal to getting the water to the very drought, kind of dry northern China. And for that reason, also there was quite a lot of villages have to move away, sort of a mandatory. So you definitely, I went to see that and document that. Definitely was very much the local people pay a very high price for these projects, and in general, like it just feels like as way of life, all these years of economic development in China is so focused on the urban, the skyscrapers, but actually the rural China is the one is really paying a heavy price,
right,
for that. And for every building up, there's a huge or few huge pits and holes and in the rivers and for the sand, for the, cement, all the resources people just have to, getting from the rural area. So I feel I wanted to focus some of my scrolls, my stories, like surrounding like a sort of a fictional village, and
Right.
the village Wen is like my fictional village where I put some of my personal knowledge with things that I have studied and wrote these stories. And when I was showing some of this, some of the Chinese critics were saying that they feel like my work is a little bit like this requiem or this eulogy, that's they get this overall tone about.
Right. I mean, I even think too, just looking at the image, and we will see in your work repeated over and over, even in the snippet that we just heard about the ghosts, right? This is like the ghosts have a lot of symbolism. Sometimes they are alluding to ancestors. Sometimes they are alluding to social ills that people have to deal with through time and time again.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really an interesting tactic that you employ in your painting that not only harkens to tradition, but also gives people an idea that they need to maybe extend their own imaginations and meet your imagination, right? So one of the things that for me, I think that when I look at this particular image, this is kind of one of the more, I'm trying to look at the image, but this is kind of one of the more like the tempo of this image is a bit more, just you're presenting a moment, right? And it's just like it's not a whirlwind of activity. It's not as dramatic. It doesn't have that sort of level of high intense emotionality that we've been talking about in some of our conversations. And I want to shift to that because I feel like a lot of the works that are in this show specifically really do present these high moments of drama. And it's deliberate for you to employ that because you're using very traditional methods and techniques, reinventing stories, creating new stories, and then, also turning what contemporary art, contemporary Asian art, what we would think, what is being classified as contemporary Asian art. I'm going to go there on its end and saying, there's a level of, it's not just about tranquility, right? And this sort of inner peace. It's not about this inner peace. You're really going at the heart of humanity and looking at this sort of intense drama of life and how people recover from that, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about move on to the next image, because when I see these images, I'm very moved. So we have on one side, we have Midnight Sudden Wind, which is another work that has text included. And then we have Mass Dance. And both of these present this sort of incredible, these incredible moments, right? There's a lot of action. There's a lot to see. There's a lot happening overall in the composition. It's very layered what you see too. So can you talk about that? Just sort of how you shift from sort of presenting just a quotidian image, right? Like the one we just saw before. It's kind of matter of fact. They're working with the fish cages, but here these are, okay, I'm coping with the environment. I'm in a moment of, I'm in a moment in the middle of a village. Like how are you making those shifts? And what should we be really maybe getting from some of these images that we see that have this high level of intense emotion?
Yeah, I think it's you know, I feel like my work a lot of times is kind of misunderstood. And it's have to do with the fact that I use very much this strategy of sort of a detour. So when people see a material that's you know, ink and paper, they're already thinking maybe have to do with, you know, like I like to detour something, maybe echoing the sort of a deep, long past, but in a way putting perspective of what we're going through today in a kind of a perspective, you know, in a kind of create some kind of attention. So I'm interested in very much of, you know, maybe also like I detouring stories in China, but actually I'm talking about America. And, you know, like in the past, I, you know, when 9/11 happened and, you know, there's a lot of Islamophobia and a lot of fear and people reporting on each other as terrorists maybe. And I was using this story of China called, it's an old story about a ghost, mistaking each other as ghosts. You know, two people were fearful of each other and in a rainy day, and each thought the other one is a ghost because they were encountering in a very strange way. And eventually it was a laugh, or they were not a ghost, but one pushes the other into the river, you know, because he's so fearful. And it's a sort of a humorous story, but sort of like detouring to China to kind of talk about the fear in America at that time. I think a lot of times people miss that. Even curators sometimes miss my intention, I really feel. And, you know, now it's sort of, we kind of, this heavy history of this phobia, Islamophobia, now it's a Sinophobia after, you know, Trump was this China virus and things. And it's, you know, xenophobia and the sort of nationalism, nativism against like immigrants and sentiments and things like that. So I am, you know, all these are my ways to, you know, really, you know, even since the 2002 Winnie Biennial, I was commenting on British colonialism and you know, so I'm kind of very much responding the best I can to the condition that I was living in America, or, you know, like the Katrina, the sort of, you know, governmental failure to protect its citizen, and in China, like the ideology of progress as a name to kind of really, you know, a lot of people really feel like they had to sacrifice themselves when really they have hardly any luxury to sacrifice themselves for the so-called collective good, you know. So the suffering of the people, and then the people are so smart using these excuses, these, you know, to, you know, oh, you need to sacrifice your little small home for the big home, you know. But when they're really suffering, who is going there to help them out, right? It's so I'm really feel like all these, I see all these really things that really troubles me and really kind of bothers me, and then I'm trying to think about it and make work from that, you know. That is sort of my process. And also, you know, a lot of times I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just drawing or something. And so many drawings of my work, I started to piecing them together and started to see a narrative of connecting different things together. And you know, I read newspaper, and I read, you know, every day I'm a kind of a news junkie. And so all the things that I read will sort of feeds into my stories as well, you see. Like, you know, like all this, and like this fish story you just read, it was something actually happened, and it was I say after it rained, the fish died. It was actually like toxic material stored by the river. So actually toxic material went into the river. That's why the fish died. And but I was, but you can see like a lot of my materials coming from everyday life, from like things I read, newspaper, blogs, and things what people are going through, and it's really what's really bothers me. Seems to be
Right. I mean, so basically what you're saying is like this energy that we're seeing, this intense emotional energy is really about an urgency that you feel in response to these situations that you read. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, when you read some of these things in the newspaper, or you listen to the news, or you read the news, I mean, it's kind of there's so many intense situations. And for me, I think like, how do people come back from that? And I feel like that's a question that you really do pose in these works a lot. Can we move on to the next slide? Because we have a detail of another piece called Wind from the North. And I was thinking while you were talking, Yun-Fei, wind and water, there's a lot. The wind and water is a protagonist in your works, a lot, right? They're just as much a character as the people themselves. And I thought to myself, like, oh man, I need to maybe reconsider a little bit more.
I made a show.
So I'm curious about that. When you started talking about the layering, I was like, oh my goodness. I had a little light bulb when you said that too, that it's not just the people that are the protagonists that we see, that, it's easy to sort of focus on the people and the gripping emotion that you see in their faces, right? But like when I look at these images, and think about the titles, even like Wind from the North, Midnight Sudden Wind, and think about some of the narratives also that are affiliated, the elements are just as much protagonists and or being impacted by man too in some way. So I'm really curious about how you're able to layer all those different stories and somehow you make them work.
Wind for me is a sort of a stand-in for sort of invisible power of the government policy, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, it's invisible, yet it's affecting our lives in a very fundamental way. And it permeates everywhere, but when it's wrong, it can really destroy people's lives, So yeah, a lot of my metaphors, like I did a show called Water That Supports the Boat Can Also Overturn It, So water is such a fundamental element in our lives, where like 95% water or something, high percentage, we are made out of water. And water also, in some of the poetry that I read, it's like standing for people,
I mean, it's a life force, right? Water sustains, and then water can also take away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Chinese word for common people is called Old 100 Names, because in China, 1.4 billion people, we have mostly 100 surnames. So I actually titled one of my show called Old 100 Names.
Oh, 100 Names. Okay. So we have another one. I want to go to the next, because we've been talking about sort of this intense emotion, but then there's another side. There's another side to this coin, right? That I feel like is a part of it. There's also this sort of resigned resigned emotion, but also a resilience that I think that you depict a lot in these images. There's just as much happening, right? But the people are still, they're like resigned to what has happened, but the will to survive still remains, right? And I think that that's an important part of the narrative that you're telling overall with your story, with your work, right? Is that these things are happening to people and they're terrible, but then there's this hopefulness, I think, that you inject. If people are paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, when I was visiting the Three Gorges Dam area, you know, it looks like all the buildings were torn down and, you know, people were still carrying on their daily lives to buy vegetables for the day. And, you know, I was so amazed how people were able to carry on their daily life in amidst all this turmoil and these huge, you know, basically when you look at where people are living, it's just, you know, it's all broken parts of buildings and, you know, so I do think that people are like water. They just, you know, keep on going, you know, so.
Yes. So I had this question and that we hadn't talked about, because I've been observing this. You do this thing in your works where you have groups, these clusters, right? So here in Before the Long Journey, you see clusters of packages, but the people are spread out, right? And then in other places, you see clusters of people, and then the people are, or the packages and the belongings are more spread out. So I want to talk about, like, is there something symbolic when you in the composition when you do those sort of clusters and groupings?
Yeah, I don't really have any really, you know, I group them together when I feel like maybe they can help each other out, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to move on to the next image, couples.
Okay.
The couples. And so this is another image. Like they're surrounded by belongings, presumably their belongings. And I'd like here, you know, the S. There are two people clearly evident here. But then the couples, they're couples throughout the scene, right? The belongings in some place are paired together in couples. And so looking at the tone of these works, again, like I said, there's this, okay, resignation, this is where we're at, but they're still there, right? This is one of the ones where I don't really see any of the ghosts here. These are just people with their belongings, but they're still here. There's still this will to survive. And I think that really leads us very nicely into your latest works, which are really about survival, but like not in the way of presenting like this is what happens when this is what happens, you know, is happening, like the sort of migration, the processes of migration and moving, right? These are very active images that are like, this is a fight, we're in a battle. And I want to move on a little bit to some of the new works, because one of my favorite works is coming up, The Nativists and the Immigrants. If we can go on to the next one. And then I want to zoom in and do that detail shot, because you know how much I love that tiger. He's so crazy. He's a crazy tiger, but like this brings up the humor, because we haven't touched on humor in your work too. And so we can talk about that. I think we should talk about that a little bit. There's a little irony, but also there is humor in this work. And I remember you telling me about the better to be eaten by a tiger than to have bad government, and telling me of that. And I thought, like, wow, but look at all these other people. They are grouped together, and how they're grouped together, and what's happening. So I want you to talk a little bit about sort of the irony and humor that you're injecting into your work also.
Yeah, the tiger, I thought about Confucius, the whole story of he was, he was traveling with his students, try to get these warring states to adopt his more humane way of managing the government. And of course, he was everybody rejected him almost. He came upon this in the mountains, and he came upon this old lady crying on a grave and he asked her why she was crying. And she said that her third son have got eaten by the tiger. And Confucius was asking her, why is your family not moving to the town at the end, at the bottom of the mountain? She's like, no, we would rather live in the mountain than to go live in that terrible place in the town, and it's being run really badly, and it's really, she would rather. So then Confucius reflect on this and says to his students, you see, people would rather eaten by the man-eating tiger than live in the bad government, to face the bad government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, ever since then, this tiger for me representing, something of that story. So
right. So there are other protagonists, because we touched on the ghost a little bit earlier.
mm-hmm.
And can we talk about sort of these hybrid figures? They're somewhat humanistic, right? But they're also animals. And what you're doing with those characters, and what you're trying to say by sort of employing these hybrids, right? They're hybrids, I guess we can call them.
Yeah, my sources are, East, some are from China, some are from, like George Orwell. I really enjoy reading his novels, Animal Farm. He has a talking pig and a dictator, and walking, straight. And so sometimes I including a pig in my work as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that leads us to another work that I think that we definitely need to talk about, which is This Is the Man with the Dagger. And this is the only piece in the show where you really concentrate purely on this one form. He's by himself and he's in a ghillie suit. Yun-Fei made sure I knew what the term was. I said to him, I was like, he's in camouflage, what? And he said, it's called a ghillie suit. So I remembered, I made my notes, ghillie suit. And so I'm really curious, and I think we talked about this before, about why is he alone, and the significance of, the camouflage, and the idea that he could be an aggressor, or he might be trying to protect himself. There are a couple ways to enter this image. And so I'm wondering if we can just chat about that a little bit.
During the pandemic, I did this work during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And, I really love my wife and I like to go to nature, to take a walk and to explore some of the really beautiful parks and, areas in Pennsylvania. At the same time, there was one day we got lost and it's getting dark, and we were, and there was all these signs, hunting related signs, and it was quite interesting, kind of a little frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Try to get out of the trail and get back, and also, in rural Pennsylvania, we really stood out, and I really stood out, and so the ghillie suit is referring to maybe a desire to kind of blend it in, but you couldn't,
Right.
And also, it's just on you know, this sort of, and you know, Asian hate, you know, all this, like, you know, the sort of xenophobia is like really prevalent and it's getting worse. And so the general sense, and also at the moment, and then you remember now it feels like such a distant past already, but at that time we really don't know where the country is going to go, you know.
Right.
There was such a uncertainty about the future, right? It was very unsettling, you
Right.
know. We don't know if a civil war is going to break out, like we don't know what's going to happen. And so I think it was a lot of anxiety and a lot of
Right.
it was,
I
so
mean,
it's really very, very personal.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I knowing a little bit about the area, you know, I grew up part of the time in Pennsylvania, and you could really stick out depending upon where you were. I mean, I remembered being kind of in culture shock as a sort of city kid, and knowing that people could take off a week to go hunting, you know, from school, like that was
yeah,
excused. And or seeing people walk around in camouflage, and what that means, because when you see people, depending upon the space they inhabit, and that's another thing we haven't touched on, is the space that's being inhabited in in your work, right?
right,
Depending upon the space in which these protagonists inhabit,
yeah,
like their identity has to sort of, there's a sort of shift, right? The
yeah,
image itself is like very um I I feel for this man. I do, but I also feel unsettled by it. And I think you've captured that unsettling that one feels when you feel like you have to shift your identity based off of the space that you inhabit and what that means to you psychologically,
yeah,
right?
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, you go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that you do. Like, one of the comments that someone has says is, it says, this Yun-Fei is truly an artist with soul. And I think that that's the thing that I see in each of the people, right? Like, someone could easily write off that the folks are like looking at the people and say, oh, that's not just those features are nondescript. It's not like an accurate rendering of a individual that they know, right? But there's something that you imbue in the works and the people, that like you see their humanity, you see it, and it's hard not to have an emotional response, in my opinion. That's my opinion. To the work. When I see it, I'm like, oh my goodness, like how, again, it's the thought that crosses my mind consistently is, how do we survive? But how do we survive together? You know, and in that sort of solitary space that you show,
Yeah,
you know, it's like, oh goodness. I remember you saying there's like an alien feeling, alienated, when you have to sort of do that sort of assimilating and trying to fit in, which I think is really important for people to think about, right? This character, this protagonist, he shows up in another image that we have for people to look at too, which I love this image. The next image, please. Oh, okay. We didn't show the man with the dagger. I'm so sorry. Good friends. You didn't get to see our man with the dagger. But yes, I love him. He is, but he seems so weary too. You know, I look at that and I said, oh, he's tired. You know, still.
You know, just I feel like such a tragedy when something like the pandemic happened, where we're all going through globally this terrible situation together, where we should have all more compassion with one another, and yet, you know, politicians are trying to drum up hate of each other, and this is the most, like, you know, like whether it's groups for people or borders or ideology. It's very unfortunate that we can like work together to really, especially when we're all, the whole planet is facing a big trouble, and we're still like fight over these. I think it's a really unfortunate situation.
No, I think you're absolutely right. This was we I think might have been presented with an opportunity to coalesce around this common germ that we were fighting, right? We were all fighting it together. Everyone was in this sort of fight for our lives. Like, I said this today, that your work for me has really captured the essence of the sort of metaphorical fight for one's life and survival, but also the physical, these new works, the physical fight to survive as well. And I really want to go on to the next image too, because like I said, this man, he appears again. He's not by himself. And this is one of those times where when I asked you earlier about your grouping, and you're saying like, I put things together because sometimes they support one another. And I think that in this one, you're like, okay, I brought in some reinforcements for him. So if we could show that the next image, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so
yes, the protesters.
Yeah, the protesters, the gas masks and young people. And yeah, I really feel like how interesting after all these years, that the younger generation are like on the streets, right? It's interesting after, like when we were young, we were on the street, and now you see the younger generation on the street as well. So,
right.
I
mean, but this is the thing. I thought it was really interesting how masks showed up in your rendering, right? Because here you could have easily thought about the face masks that we've all been wearing, these cloth masks, the sort of medical masks, but you really took it up to the next level and said, no, I'm going to put on this whole mask that you need to survive. And also it disguises your face also a bit. I feel like when you regular face masks, you get to see people's eyes and may start to recognize, but there's this level of anonymity that you kind of get. And it's a safety measure. I think you were talking about earlier too. We've been talking about it being a safety measure to have a level of anonymity. Sometimes when you're going to these protests because of what has been happening, and this isn't just this is everywhere. I think, right, that we've seen that at these protests that people have been injured. There have been really serious consequences that have happened.
Yeah.
So I think, one of the things I know that we also have been talking about is the sort of intersectionality of the work. I think we've hit home over and over again today, talking about global events, talking about not just current events or past events that happen in China, but here in America, in England, all over the world, just these sort of different things that have been happening. You could even talk about the refugee crisis in the Middle East if we start to really sort of expand the dialogue, because we see migration happening, forced migration happening globally.
Yeah.
We see protests happening globally, and therefore different things, but they're basically situated in the fight for human rights, the fight for survival, the fight to live. And I think that, your work speaks to how we need to be thinking about the world right now. Like it's a really strong visualization of the world right now. And I do think that there's hope in the work. I really do. I think that I see you saying like, we need to, if you present it, it's better to present what's happening, right? Than to try and cover it up, because we've seen what happens when you cover up bad things, right? It eventually can fester and then it boils over. So I think what I see mostly about your work is really it being a call to action.
Very much, coming from a perspective of immigrant, that myself is an immigrant, and I also my work is migration is a very important theme for my work, and I feel like it's very like it's a topic that I feel like I can really sink my teeth into and talk with some knowledge and because I feel like it's such a contemporary phenomena, and we all have to move from one place to another place for survival reasons, for whatever reasons, to find job or to kind of reinvent ourselves, and to kind of be the stranger, be the observer. Being the perspective of an immigrant is that you are on the margin and you are very much of an observer of the norm of the place and the culture of the place. And so very much I feel like it's from that kind of place of strangeness and a place of, to kind of, even when I go back to China, I would still feel like China has moved on, and I'm looking at from this very weird perspective, and there was a lot of things in pop culture I have missed, and I had to kind of refamiliarize what's going on. And so I feel like it's a very strange place. It could very easily happen that I could be, try to sit on the two stools and I can fall in between the two stools and sit on the floor instead, So very much, I think it's a place of discomfort, but yet I think it can be also productive too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm about to open up the floor for questions from our audience this evening. But before I do that, I told you I was going to ask you what you're working on, because we see a sneak peek inside the studio. And so I'm really curious about some of the new work. Are you continuing in the same vein that we just showed some of the newer work right now? What else can we expect to see?
We will see. I mean, it's very hard for me to describe what's going on in my studio. Generally, is fairly chaotic, and I have many works going on, and then sometimes I would hit a wall. I then have to put away for weeks or even months before I find a new solution, or some ideas would come. And so it's a very slow process. I would sometimes pick up work maybe I was working on 2 years ago, and keep working on them. So yeah.
Okay. 2 years ago. Wow. Like, that is a long process. It is. But like, you know what? We know that nothing worth doing it can ever be done quickly. And I definitely think that you are showing us, the worth and value of, thinking deeply and critically about the world that we live in, and to also be mindful of others, the struggle that others are encountering, the struggle that we have ourselves, and just to be mindful of how we connect with one another. I think that that's something. So if there are other questions that people have, please do put it in the chat for us, please. We'll go for it for a little bit more, but I know we didn't plan to talk for a full hour. Yun-Fei, I said we talk for 40 minutes. We've been talking.
Yeah.
I love talking to you though. I think that like I always feel like I have these like light bulb moments. Like you say things and I'm like, oh, okay. That's, it's brilliant.
Yeah, same
So
here.
really, and I can't encourage our audience enough to come and see the exhibition. It is just lovely. It looks beautiful. And it really is an impactful exhibition. I think it's something that you have to see in person. I do not think that I did your work nearly enough justice by presenting it digitally today. I'm so pleased that we're back at looking at art in person. There's a question here, and it says, China has changed so much in the last 20 years. What do you think of these changes? To me, there are a lot of positives. Do you agree or not?
Yeah, like I said, you can see, China has, created this huge middle class. And in some of the environmental front, like wind power and such, China is on the front. There are definitely positive things. All this years, very hard work. Chinese people work day and night, so it's really have made a very big change. At the same time, I think there's the environmental price is very high. Like the countryside paid a very high price, and the air, the pollution, of the soil, the river, is going to take generations to recover. So I think it's a very mixed. It's very complicated. Of course, I can only say from my own perspective, and it's a. I mean, economically, it's came to, very powerful. It grows a lot, and the GDP, and that's what I heard. But it's still like the gap between the rich and the poor is also tremendous. Probably one of the worst in the world, other than United States. Yeah, so I think it's a very complicated situation in terms of like, oh, how, and also it's very misunderstood. I feel like it's, you really have to go see for yourself, and to, I feel like, yeah, it's a very complicated story. That's yeah, it depends on which aspect are you talking about. Very disturbing things happening. When I was there, like I said, I spent about 5-6 years in Beijing, and I went, numerous trips to rural China, and at that time, a lot of sort of ownership of their land, people's land, and also, I feel like there's developers and governments somehow are sort of grabbing land from poor people, like by force, and people lose their property in a way very hard for them to get justice. So there are things like that was very troubling, and so yeah, maybe it's my own disposition. I seem to be like getting this get really troubled by things like that. And yeah, I mean, even I see for myself, the mayor of Beijing would call all these migrants coming to the city undesirable, low quality people, and evicted them, closing down their shops overnight by force. And so, yeah, so there were, things you don't see so much being reported, but things really troubling to me. Yeah, when you look at the, I'm not an economist, so, like all these numbers, I had an argument with someone, economists actually. They were saying they were, if you look at the numbers, they look good, and so it's a, it's a very, it's a very complex situation. You know, that's yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, I have a comment that someone says they cannot wait to see your exhibit. And so I'm
Oh,
going
great.
to underscore that I agree. It is one of those exhibitions that you do not want to miss. It is really incredible. And I feel really grateful to have been able to work with you. You've been like the best artist to work with. And also really collaborate with and help me to think very deeply and outside of the box about what's happening now and the visualizations of what I see happening in the work too. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all our discussion of you know, what all this happening, cultural transformation, all this things happening in America, and you know, we had all these very, you know, for me, very, you know, enriching conversations. You know, looking at a history of civil rights and all the, you know, experience between different communities. And I feel like you know, some of the stories what's happening that I was researching on, what you were echoing, what's happened, like you were saying something about Chicago, community in Chicago,
Oh, yes.
what they were experiencing, and feel there was a commonality, you know, there was some.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it was funny because you at one point I think I just went back to Chicago for the first time in oh goodness, since this began, like maybe almost a full year around the Easter time. And it was just very strange. It was strange to not be in Kalamazoo, first of all. Like I've just been in Kalamazoo. But it was just strange to see like how the major areas in like the downtown were boarded up, how people were walking around the city, and just even to hear the sort of frustration of the people, like that city had boiled over at one point, you know, and it has a history. And I think even your work, and I didn't say this earlier, but your work has a history, you know, like that's these different places and spaces that the people are in have a history. And just because people aren't there, those people aren't there, doesn't mean that that history goes away, you know? Try as people might to maybe erase it. The history does not go away. It's still there.
Yeah. History
And
is not, yeah, it's not dead.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, I don't know if we have any more questions. I know that we are a little over our normally we try and keep these to an hour, but I want to just tell you we have been given a great conversation, and I always have great conversations, and I'm hoping that I get to see you soon and in person. And I thank everyone for attending our program this evening. I invite you to come and see Yun-Fei Tall Tales of a Scavenger. Very poetic. I think you have poetry too. Do you write poetry? You write a little poetry. I think you do. To come and see the exhibition. It is on view now through September 5th. We are open. Today was our first Thursday open in over a year, almost a year. So we're really pleased to welcome the public from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So come and see the exhibition. And I thank you again. I really appreciate you. Can't say enough amazing things about you. And I'll talk to you soon. And I hope to see you at the KIA.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. You know, it's great talking to you.
Great to talk to you too. Good night, everyone. Thank you.